Welcome, dear viewers, to a journey through the darkest corners of history, where secrets are buried and shadows conceal unsolved mysteries. On this channel, we embark on a chilling exploration of historical crimes and murder that have sent shivers down the spines of generations. From infamous killers to unsolved mysteries that continue to baffle experts, our quest for the truth will take us on a harrowing ride through time. These stories are not for the faint of heart. Join me as we unravel the chilling tales of deception, betrayal, and bloodshed that have left an indelible mark on history. Brace yourselves, for the past is riddled with secrets that are waiting to be unearthed. So, grab your detective hats because this is Crimes and Murder, unveiling history's darkest secrets. This story of murderous deceit and intrigue has more twists and turns than a mountain pass. A murder committed, a quick confession, an open and shut case. Not by a long chalk. A confession withdrawn, 2 trials, double indemnity, and a hand with 3 fingers missing, all add up to a web of lies and no trip to the gallows for the perpetrator of this heinous crime. Of course, a thought must be given to those left behind who will not have closure, and of course for the victim who should be remembered rather than the killer. Portsmouth on the south coast of England is a densely populated city, with a very large naval base. With such a large population added to by the Royal Navy sailors who were stationed there, it was suggested there were more public houses per head of population than any other city in the United Kingdom at the time. The time being 1943, in the middle of the Second World War. Portsmouth had suffered hugely during the Blitz of 1940–41, when the Nazi Luftwaffe tried to destroy the naval base. Large sections of the city had been flattened. By 1943, the bombing was not as bad, and people had to try and carry on as normal, going to work and running into air raid shelters if the dreaded sirens sounded. On the morning of November 29, 1943, a woman who cleaned in the pub, the John Barleycorn, knocked on the door to be let in. She tried for a long time, knocking more loudly and shouting too. Her shouting woke a sailor who lived next door, and she explained to him the landlady of the public house was always up to let her in. She said she was worried she might have been taken ill. On hearing this, the sailor used his shoulder and broke down the door, entering into the dark hallway. He called out, and when there was no reply, he went up the back staircase and into the first bedroom. First he saw drawers had been opened with items spilling out. He saw the blackout curtain had been pulled down off its rail and a group of handbags on the bed. It was then that he saw the body of an older woman lying on the floor. He could see clearly she was dead, and that is when the police were called. The John Barleycorn was situated in the very busy commercial road area, which was lined with shops, businesses, a theatre, and of course many public houses. Sadly, nothing is left of the John Barleycorn today, the whole area having been demolished in 1972 to make way for a large dual carriageway at the northern end and pedestrianisation on the rest of the road. Anyone returning from 1943 would be hard-pressed to recognise any shops or businesses they knew then. We can calculate roughly where the pub stood using one of the witness statements. He tells where he was in relation to the backyard of the pub, so the John Barleycorn would have stood somewhere close to here. In 1911, Gilbert and Rose Robinson took over the pub for Brickwood's Brewery. In 1932, Gilbert died, and Rose, being the strong independent woman she was, took on the pub on her own. It was not unusual for a woman to run a pub in Edwardian times, and this carried on into the 1940s. The body discovered by the sailor in the bedroom was that of Rose Robinson, landlady of the John Barleycorn. A detective sergeant arrived at the property at 10:20 a.m. to investigate what might have happened. The body was in the back bedroom, which the detective could see was the bedroom she normally slept in. She lay on the floor and had been strangled. He also saw the drawers of the dressing table had been ransacked. He noted the bedroom was in some disarray and assumed there had been a struggle of some sort. He noted there were some handbags on the messy bed sheets. He also saw that the blackout cloth and rail had been torn from over the window and now laid on the floor. Next, in their inquiry, the police interviewed Rose's son, who told them she kept her money in 2 handbags and, not trusting banks, paid the brewery each month in cash. He did her bookkeeping for her and estimated at this time of the month she would have had about £400 in £1 and 10-shilling notes. In today's value, that would have been about £5,000. On further investigation, the police discovered a broken window at the back of the premises and surmised that was probably how the murderer gained access. On the sill outside, they found a black button that had been torn from a coat. the broken thread still attached. A doctor arrived at the scene to examine the body. He deduced that Rose probably tried to get to the window to scream, but fell to her knees and rolled onto her back. It was then the assailant sat across her chest and, using all their weight, strangled her with their right hand. Investigation continued locally. No further leads were discovered, but many witnesses gave statements. A man who was a friend of Rose and had worked for her for 3.5 years confirmed she kept money and handbags in her bedroom. He said on the night in question he had locked up the premises securely and was let out by the bar door and saying good night, heard the door lock click and the bolt being secured behind him. Next, they interviewed the cleaner more fully, who told them how she had discovered the body with the sailor. She too confirmed that Rose kept the cash rolled up in pounds and 10-shilling notes held with rubber bands. These were kept in the handbags that Rose hid under the cover at the end of her bed. Obviously, from what we are hearing, it would seem everybody knew about the handbags and the cash. Next, they interviewed the sailor who said he was a stoker in the Royal Navy. He told how he had discovered the body and called the police. There were 2 further witnesses, whose testimony at the time may have seemed not so important, but would later actually prove a confession. A man working nights for the brewery in Grafton Street, the road behind Commercial Road at the time, said he heard a noise around 3:30 a.m. on the night in question, coming from the direction of the back of the pub. He then heard someone muttering to themselves and disturbing the railings at the back of his workplace. He took a torch and went out to investigate, but whoever was there had gone. A little while later, he heard breaking glass, but after that, he didn't hear anything else that night. The most interesting story was told by the lady living at 514 Commercial Road. She said she was woken between 1 and 3 with a loud banging on the back kitchen window, which knocked the blackout down. She said she heard footsteps in the kitchen, then heard no more. She was frightened and stayed in her bedroom. At about 2:30, she heard footsteps moving around the outside of her house in the alley between her property and the pub. She looked out the front window and saw a van. She said that the following morning she went into her kitchen to see the blackout, which was a piece of 3-ply had been broken and laid outside. She also noted the back door was ajar, although she had definitely locked and bolted it the night before. It was obvious, as she had feared that night, someone had broken in, yet nothing had been taken. Our story now moves 70 miles north to London. 2 policemen heard about a ne'er-do-well trying to sell boots in a cafe. They made their way there to see what was going on. Sure enough, they found him and asked him where he got the boots. With that question, he told them, "Scotland Yard want me for more that. I did an old woman down in Portsmouth. It will be the noose for me." Surprised at such an instant confession, they obviously took him along to the police station to be interviewed. His name was Harold Lowhands, 46 years old, and he had a police record as long as his arm. 2 detectives drove up from Portsmouth to interview him, to check he knew the facts before taking him back to Hampshire. "What don't you believe I did it then?" he said to them. "It doesn't matter what we think. It's what you know that matters." They replied. Lowhands stated that he heard about the landlady and how she kept the money in her bed and he needed money. So he decided on the spur of the moment to go and get the money. He gave them enough facts to convince them he knew things only someone who had been there would. The date was 21st December, 3rd week since the murder. He said it had been preying on his mind and he'd had a bad time. He asked if the old bird had a bad heart, as she'd gone quiet so quickly. The next day found him in Portsmouth prison being questioned by the police. His clothes were taken for examination. "It's all right, Inspector. You won't find any buttons. When I realized I'd lost one on the robbery, I ripped them all off my coat." Lowhands had a deformed right hand with 3 fingers missing, and the 4th had the top missing. The police took a plaster cast of the hand. When first interviewed, he stated, "I cannot remember the name of the public house. It was in Commercial Road. I cannot be sure of the date, but I think it was the 28th November. When I climbed over the wall at the back of the pub, I had a look around in the gardens. I broke open a window and got into a house, but I could not find a bar, so got out again. I then went to the back of a house further along and broke a window to get in. This time, I found a bar, so I went up the stairs. In the back bedroom, I saw a woman. I shone my torch on her hand. She asked who I was. I didn't reply, but I saw she was clutching 2 bags. Over the course of 3 interviews, the story changes about how he fought with her and took the money. However, in most versions, he said the money was around £450 in notes and silver. There are other reports it was more like £1,200, which would have been a vast amount. He said he left by the back door, got in a van and drove back to London thinking the old bird had had a heart attack. As you can see, all the facts fit in perfectly with details given by the neighbour and the night watchman in the brewery. The police felt sure they had their murderer. To complicate matters further, Lohans claimed he had given a girl back in London £50 and put the rest of the money in a suitcase and hidden it. He said he didn't want to name the girl. He said if he got arrested, then she was to take the suitcase and go. And as he had been arrested, she must have gone. The police were happy they had a good case, and the trial for murder took place in 1944. Joshua Caswell was the prosecution barrister, and commented later in his life he believed this was the easiest case he'd ever prosecuted. He said it appeared to be cut and dried, an open and shut case of murder if ever there was one. Of course, he soon discovered what an odd case it would become. At the first trial at Winchester, Caswell was shocked to discover there was now a defence he was not expecting. First line of defence was Lohans saying he didn't do it, his confession being false. He said he acquired the facts from the police interviewing him. He had in the past confessed to 2 murders he had not committed. Then the defence produced some very credible witnesses that stated they had seen him at Warren Street tube station that was used as an air raid shelter. These people did not know him, but recognised him by his deformed hand. Finally, the defence called Dr. Francis Camps. He was a well-known pathologist. He claimed that it was impossible for Lohans to have strangled the victim with his disfigured hand. The marks on her neck were not consistent with such a deformed hand. The judge, in summing up, said that on the one hand there was a confession, and on the other, an undisputed alibi, plus medical evidence supporting him. The jury were just as confused and failed to reach a verdict. Mr. Justice Atkinson was just as confused, and as the presiding judge wanted to see a quick outcome, so ordered a retrial within 2 weeks. The retrial took place at the Old Bailey in London, the most important court in England. Caswell was again prosecuting, and had prepared a case that disproved the alibi that Lohans relied on. However, for the defence, John Maud KC pulled a great stunt and called the celebrity expert of the day, Sir Bernard Pillsbury. I have never known a man having his fingers cut off having been concerned with strangulation. With that, and his celebrity status, the jury were swayed. The judge did not let Caswell bring his evidence that disproved the alibi, so the jury deliberated for less than an hour and found Lohans not guilty. Leaving the court a free man, he was instantly arrested again. Remember, he was a career criminal and was arrested for other crimes he had committed in the meantime. So that should have been that. Once found not guilty in those days, you couldn't be retried for the same murder, so even if new evidence appeared, he wouldn't be charged again. Yet there is yet another chapter to this story, and not the last. Now we move forward in time to the 1960s. Caswell was persuaded by the national newspaper The Sunday People to write his memoirs of his most interesting cases to be serialized in the paper. In the episode, The Case of the Confession and the Cast Iron Alibi. He noted the clues, confession and such strong witness statements certainly pointed to facts Lohans did commit the murder. Lohans at the time was in prison as usual when he read the article, being the man looking for the main chance he knew he had been found not guilty. So for Caswell to accuse him in a national paper was libelous. I suspect he hoped for a fat paycheck from a libel case. Witnesses had to be found, and the case finally took place in February 1963. Patrick O'Connor QC was Lohans' barrister, and opened by stating that there can be no worse libel than false accusation of murder. He presented all the same defence as had been given at the trial at the Old Bailey. Neville Fawkes for the defence, representing the newspaper, the publisher and Caswell himself, simply stated that all the facts in the article were true, and it was up to the reader to make up their own mind. He went on to state the article did not explicitly state Lohans did it. He went on to say, "The defendants boldly say that it does not mean that, but, if it does, then he is guilty." Yes, a little confusing. It soon became clear the defence of the libel simply needed to put the prosecution case from the trial for the murder, but this time were allowed to disprove the alibi of Lohans being in London at the time of the murder. Yet as before, the medical evidence was crucial. Sir Bernard Spilsbury was dead, and Professor Keith Simpson took the stand. I have no doubt at all that Lohans was the strangling hand in this case. Obviously, he deceived Sir Bernard, Dr. Camps and others with the strength of his right hand. The hand is not weak, as the stumps would increase the power of the grip, because the shorter the finger, the more power at the end. The judge in summation made a point that Lohans had spent 47 of his 66 years in prison. He also made mention of the man's doubtful character. The jury deliberated for 3 hours and found for the defendants, bringing about the strange situation of finding the plaintiff, Lohans, guilty of the murder by jury. Of course, because of double indemnity, he could not be charged again. He did return to prison, though, to finish his sentence. So now the final twist. Lohans approached the Sunday People and asked if he could finally tell the truth. It ended at the offices of the newspaper, where he wrote the confession and signed it. A picture of him, pen in hand, appeared on the front page. This was finally the end, but it was shameless of him to put the family and loved ones of our landlady through all he did. He was nothing more than a man with no morals who escaped the gallows. If you found this story of intricate intrigue and suspenseful twists captivating, I invite you to express your support by liking and subscribing to my channel. I am committed to bringing you an array of compelling tales encompassing mysteries and harrowing crimes. Thank you for watching, and if you have any comments, then do share them with us all. So until next time you join me, stay safe and sleep well. Goodbye.